All right, family covenant for the modern age, the wife. Wives are helpers. They are the best gift from God because they help men not be alone. Most women don't realize just how desperately men need their companionship. If men are alone, what's the point of living? That's why so many men today commit suicide. In fact, suicide rates among men are 3 times higher than among women. And often these are murder suicides because men can't live with their wives, but they also can't live without them. So men are stuck in the same place Adam was, between a not good existence and a woman who will likely bring him death. But since the risk of death is better than the guarantee of meaninglessness, men choose women every time. This is why women have been, for better or worse, the primary focus of men throughout history. But chasing women is not what men were called to do. When God created the woman, he brought her to the man. This is an important detail because it shows us that men aren't responsible for solving the problem of meaninglessness. God is. Since he's the one who called Adam's state of existence not good, it's his responsibility to fix the problem. No matter how hard we try, we cannot fix our existential problems. Young people today often moan about having an existential crisis, yet try as they may, they can't solve the problem because it's not within their domain. Only God can solve problems in the existential domain, so all we can do is cry out to him for help. If a man is suffering from loneliness, he shouldn't take matters into his own hands and go to a brothel for comfort. Instead, he should ask God for help and then wait patiently for an answer. Pay careful attention to how God solved Adam's problem. He created a woman out of Adam's own body. Wives need to recognize the profound significance of this. It means they belong to their husband. They must let their husband own them. Eve was not made from an outside substance, but rather from Adam's own body. Adam was getting back part of his own body when God brought her to him. And it wasn't just his rib cage that would be made whole, it was his entire being. She transformed his existence from not good to very good. What a life-changing nap. God took out part of his body and transformed it into his living soulmate who would complete him in every way to perfectly display the image of the living, loving God. The best gift then that a wife can give her husband is her eagerness to belong to him. Possession sounds like slavery to the untrained ear, but in the eyes of the wise, ownership is freedom. People crave ownership. They want to belong to someone and have someone belong to them. Lovers use possessive words all the time. She's my girl. Imagine a husband introducing his wife by saying, "This is a wife." No woman would accept that. But somehow the word possessive has taken on a negative connotation in today's world. It means being clingy, which, strangely enough, is exactly how the Bible says it should be. For this cause a man shall leave his father and mother, and shall cling to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. Love isn't smothering, but it is protecting. If a wife wants her husband to protect her, she needs to give him full authority over her. The more authority she gives him, the more responsibility he'll take. Here's a formula that all wives should memorize. Responsibility minus authority equals manipulation. I'll read that again. Responsibility minus authority equals manipulation. If someone has the responsibility to do something, they need to be given the authority to carry it out. The more responsibility someone has, the more authority they need. If you want your husband to take more responsibility, give him more authority. This requires relinquishing control. If you keep control, it's called manipulation. Men hate feeling manipulated. If they don't have the authority to do something, they won't do it. Women are often frustrated that their husbands aren't taking responsibility, but the real problem is their own unwillingness to relinquish authority. For example, if the wife makes a snippy comment about the way he's handling the kids, he'll feel like he's being manipulated and stop trying. Then she'll get mad at him for not trying, and he'll shut off even more. The problem here is that she doesn't understand her role as a wife. Wives exist for their husbands, not the other way around. That's exactly what Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 11. For man is not from woman, but woman from man. Nor was man created for the woman, but woman for the man. In our culture, women are taught precisely the opposite. Men need to make you happy and serve your ambitions and protect your interests. That's why so many wives in the West are deeply unsatisfied. They're going against what they were made for. The solution is simple. Stop being the boss and put yourself at your husband's disposal, trusting that he won't dispose of you. Let him control you. Give him maximum trust and confidence. Train your heart to come underneath his authority. Forget about your own path in life and follow his path. Serve his ambitions and protect his interests. The most powerful thing a wife can say to her husband is, "How can I help you?" When she says these words, she's restoring Eden and fulfilling God's call on her life. And asking this question ensures that she finds out what his needs really are, not what she thinks they are. Wives always think they're helping their husbands, but in reality, they rarely are. As a wife, you need to make it your mission to find out what he really needs and help him in that. You might think, he needs to know that I love him all the time, so I'm going to text him throughout the day telling him how much I love him. He doesn't need that. It's more of a burden than a help to him. The reason you think he needs that is because you yourself need that. But just because you need something doesn't mean he needs the same thing. You might think he needs kids. You might think he needs a good meal. You might think he needs your advice on how to be a good dad. It doesn't matter what you think he needs. What matters is what he needs. Find out, because you might be spending your energy on something he doesn't need at all. That's why honest and open communication is key early on in the relationship. Don't marry him if you don't know how you can really help him, because helping him is your very purpose in life. If you fail to help him, you won't be happy. Ask him frequently how you can help him and wait patiently for him to think of a reply. He'll probably need some time to answer you because he's been alone his whole life and doesn't even know what kind of help he needs. In his awkwardness, he might say something like, "Oh, you don't need to do anything. You're perfect already." Don't accept this answer. Force him to give you a better answer. Keep pushing him until he gives you an honest answer. He's probably too terrified to really let you into his mind. He knows he needs help because God said he did. Push him into a reality where he's comfortable being honest with you. Men hate asking for help and don't want to burden the wife they love. They want to carry all the burdens alone so that their wife will have a comfortable life. The wife needs to recognize this tendency and help him understand that God didn't make her to be comfortable. He made her to carry his burdens and be his companion in life. Here is some sage advice for wives. Put yourself at your husband's disposal. This doesn't sound like a good word, but in fact, it's what he needs. He needs to be able to use you whenever and however he needs. This doesn't mean he will toss you in the garbage. In fact, the more disposable you are to him, the less he will want to dispose of you. If you give him the right to use you however he sees fit, he will gain the confidence to actually do it. If you don't make yourself disposable to him, he will probably never develop the confidence to use you. Again, the word use doesn't sound like a good word in today's culture, but relationships always must be used, otherwise there is no point to them. Men get help by using things. They use hammers and drills. They use their truck to haul things. They don't use the delicate china collection they inherited from their late grandma. It's too awkward for them to use. They're too afraid of ruining it. They don't know how to handle it properly, so they just use dollar store plates instead. What kind of plate do you want to be? A china plate safely tucked away in a cabinet, or a plate that actually gets used every day? Many women get extremely hurt when their husband or boyfriend uses pornography for sexual pleasure instead of using them. Some even feel used that he used porn. Isn't that ironic? They feel used when they didn't get used at all? How could my husband stoop to the level of looking at those cheap whores online when he has me? The answer is he doesn't know how to use you. He can use a prostitute because she's made herself disposable to him. He's not afraid of making mistakes with her like he is with you. The prostitute needs him. She needs him every day to come and use her. Not surprisingly, men often fall in love with a certain prostitute or porn star and keep going back to that same woman for the rest of their lives. Men crave relationship just as much as women. Men need safety and trust too. Imagine having a woman to meet your needs without unloading a laundry list of expectations on you. That's what men get from prostitutes. Maximum comfort and minimum expectations. They get a helper who's available to comfort them for a brief moment in time and take a load off their mind. The only problem is, it's not genuine. Prostitutes are good actors who know what a man's deepest needs are. Men know they're acting, but it's the closest thing to Eden they can get, which is why it feels so good. Satan sets his snares at the root of our deepest desires. He gives us fake solutions that make us feel good temporarily, but hidden in his ruse is the venom that soon delivers its fatal blow. This is why the book of Proverbs repeatedly equates prostitutes to death. For the lips of an immoral woman drip honey, and her mouth is smoother than oil, but in the end she is bitter as wormwood, sharp as a two-edged sword. Her feet go down to death, her steps lay hold of hell. God requires real love and care for each other. Would a prostitute service a dying man with no money? Of course not. But the Good Samaritan did. And that's the kind of love God requires, setting aside our own interests for the interests of others. Ruth's closest relative refused to redeem her because he deemed her a risk to his estate. But Boaz gladly set aside that risk and redeemed her. The woman who anointed Jesus with an alabaster jar of costly ointment set aside her own comfort and convenience to give her all to Jesus. Joseph of Arimathea risked his own safety by going to Pilate, then laid Jesus in his own tomb. Nicodemus brought 75 pounds of spices to wrap Jesus' body in. There was nothing fake about any of the people who loved Jesus. They selflessly gave their all to the one who gave his all for them. They abased themselves in response to the God who abased himself for them. A prostitute might abase herself for her own gain, knowing that fake humility pays more than genuine pride. But who in their right mind would abase themselves for the gain of others? It goes completely against the system of this world. But that's exactly what the apostles did. They eagerly flaunted the title slave in their relationship to Jesus, knowing that God lifts up those who are bowed down and brings down those who lift themselves up. Because they put themselves at God's disposal, they were used in tremendous ways to alter the course of history. A wife must make herself usable and assume a low position so that her husband can exalt her. How could a husband exalt his wife when she has already exalted herself? How could he draw her if she has an attitude of entitlement to be by his side? The more power distance she gives him, the more room he has to exalt her and draw her to himself. It's a real shame that wives are not willing to get down on their knees for their husbands even once after their husband got down on one knee for them. Women in our culture are taught to believe that they are queens worthy of royal treatment or diamonds deserving of grandiose display. Well, it's true that an excellent wife is the crown of her husband. It's also true that pride brings a person low. Wives should never let their hearts become puffed up with pride, otherwise they'll be following in the line of Jezebel and Michal. Rather, they must adorn themselves with humility so as to walk in the line of Ruth, Abigail, and Esther. These women risked everything and freely gave their full trust to their husbands. Wives today must also freely give their full trust. If they withhold their trust, they are following in the line of Queen Vashti. If they betray his trust, they are following in the line of Delilah. The Bible is full of stories for wives to learn from. Yet somehow the only thing women's Bible studies focus on is how bold and confident these women were. Submission and abasement are never things that are gleaned from the story. Is it because women fear that they'll be used like a paper plate if they humble themselves? Probably, but this will not happen if they find a noble man who values them like Boaz valued Ruth. Women must choose faith over fear, because this is where their true beauty lies. Peter describes it this way: Wives, in the same way, submit yourselves to your own husbands, so that if any of them do not believe the word, they may be won over without words by the behavior of their wives when they see the purity and reverence of your lives. Your beauty should not come from outward adornment, such as elaborate hairstyles and wearing of gold jewelry or fine clothes. Rather, it should be that of your inner self, the unfading beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is of great worth in God's sight. For this is the way the holy women of the past, who put their hope in God, used to adorn themselves. They submitted themselves to their own husbands, like Sarah, who obeyed Abraham and called him her Lord. You are her daughters if you do what is right and do not give way to fear. Fear of what? Submission. Submission requires handing over your authority to your husband, which makes him twice as strong. By taking on his name, you multiply his name and give up your name. There is more of him and less of you. You do this because you're confident that he will use this strength to protect you. Why would you give him your strength if you were actually more confident in your own ability to protect yourself? If you want to fight your own battles, you should keep your strength for yourself. But if you want him to fight your battles, you better make sure he's strong enough to win. Otherwise, you both die. By giving him your strength, you become vulnerable to him while gaining protection through him. The more vulnerable you become to him, the more he can protect you. You don't need to fear this position because he is your ally, not your enemy. A man will only fight for a woman if he owns her. Wise women understand this. Foolish women cling to their control and wonder why he's avoiding marriage. If you want a man to marry you fast, give him your strength fast, just like Abigail and Ruth did. Position yourself to be easily used by him, and you will become his most precious possession. Ruth assumed a vulnerable position toward Boaz on the threshing floor. Abigail assumed a vulnerable position toward David when she bowed down to him in the mountain ravine. They made themselves lower. Unfortunately, Christian women today don't take these stories to heart at all. Rather, they seek to develop themselves in order to become a better Christian or a better person. But how does that help their husband in any way? It doesn't. There are so many enlightened people in the world who are completely useless human beings. What good does a PhD serve when your husband is using a prostitute? The best education a wife can receive is this: put yourself beneath your husband and serve him till death do you part. Women need to choose this position. Forced marriage is not acceptable in Christianity. Even Paul recommends that Christian women stay single so that they can devote themselves to the Lord's affairs. But if they want to get married, that's fine. They just need to think realistically about what they want to accomplish with their lives. Far too often, they try to have their cake and eat it too. They want marriage, they want ministry, they want children, they want a business, they want control, they want everything. When their brain goes haywire like this, they accomplish nothing. Not only do they accomplish nothing, but they end up taking down a good man who might have otherwise accomplished a thing or two with his life. God is not happy with women like this. Fortunately, in his abundant mercy, he weaves our failures into his good plan. But we need to keep our haywiredness under control. Life requires trade-offs. It's not realistic for a woman to want ministry, marriage, and motherhood. Being a good wife is already a hard job that requires hours of dedication per day. Add motherhood on top of that, and you're working at least 16 hours a day. If you try to take on ministry commitments, your marriage and your motherhood will suffer. Accomplishing one thing in life is better than attempting 3. If you want to be a good wife, give your husband a good deal. This will require giving things up. If you give things up to him, he'll give things up for you. If you give up your control to him, he'll give up his laziness and try to be a good leader. If you give up your strength to him, he'll give up his comfort to fight for you. If you give up your heart to him, he'll give up his independence and embrace you. If you give up your name to him, he'll give up his fear of having children and want you to mother his offspring. Millions of women end up as single mothers because they don't understand that they have to give things up. They wake up one morning to an abusive husband and wonder what happened. I gave him my heart. Why is he treating me like this? Nobody has the wherewithal to tell her that this is happening because giving him her heart wasn't enough. What good is your heart if you didn't give him your children? Wifehood is not a stepping stone to motherhood. Wifehood is the stone of your covenant. Your vows never even mentioned kids. And now you're wondering why his attitude changed? You changed. You forgot that your covenant was all about him. Repent of your selfishness and save your family. When a wife accepts the fact that her role is to give everything for her husband, she should boil down her role to its core function, usefulness. The reason prostitutes are so successful is because they've stripped things down to the bare bones. Use me. No wonder prostitutes were the first to enter the kingdom of God. They didn't overcomplicate things like everyone else did. Simplicity is the key to success, and the simplest thing a wife can say to her husband is, use me. Remember, a good man will strive to exalt his wife, not put her down. If she comes underneath him, he will lift her up, and together they will be useful for God. All couples should pray, use us, God. That's what marriage is all about, being used by God. His glory is more important than our glory. God's purposes are more important than our purposes. God's name is more important than our name. If a husband and wife are going to come underneath the name of God, they need to bear it to worthfulness, not worthlessness. This requires being useful. In the same way, if a wife is going to come underneath the name of her husband, she needs to bear it to worthfulness. She should never think she is serving her husband for no reason. Even in the absence of appreciation, a wife can take comfort in the fact that God sees her humble service and he will reward her richly. Do you remember the KJV term helpmeet? It's a good term because it emphasizes an aspect of a wife's role that can sometimes be forgotten, her presence. A man desperately needs a woman's comforting presence. Life is full of discomfort, but God gave women a special ability to heal a man's discomfort. Men need comfort so badly that they often take it by force. That's why Korean sex slaves were called comfort women in World War II. The Japanese soldiers desperately needed comfort. Even the most brutal men need comfort. In fact, every man in the world needs comfort, and wives should keep this in mind continually as they live out their role. The meet in helpmeet indicates the way in which the help is carried out. Wives meet with their husband. Think about kings in the olden days, or even today. They had servants to do their work for them. The wives didn't wash their dishes or fold their clothes or cook their meals. Meeting, for the most part, was the wife's only responsibility. Remember Queen Esther? Her only job was to meet with the king when he summoned her. That's why he got so angry when his previous wife, Vashti, refused his summons. She failed her one and only job. He experienced so much discomfort from that situation that he sent out a decree to the entire kingdom ordering wives to obey their husbands. This story should be a warning for all wives around the world. Do not fail to meet with your husband. He needs your presence so badly that your marriage will end badly if you don't give it gladly. Fine-tune your presence to be maximally comforting to him. Never forget your rib origins. Your sheer proximity to his heart means that you can cause him tremendous pain. That's why you need to refine your character in a way that will be soothing to him. Imagine having a rib with jagged edges. It would stab you in the heart. Because he needs you so badly, banish the word no from your vocabulary. Never be withholding. Ask your husband, what kind of woman do you want me to be for you? Let him give you an honest answer, and remember to add the words for you at the end of your question, because that is in fact what you were made for. After listening to his response, try to be the kind of woman he needs. Nowadays, women are taught to say, I am who I am. Take it or leave it, I'm not going to change. This is being withholding. Instead, a wife should be the most generous person in the world to her husband. And along with not withholding herself from him, she should also not withhold him from anything else. He needs to be free. Wives should tell their friends, "My husband does whatever he wants." And wives should tell this to their husbands too. They should deeply desire his freedom. Nobody wants to feel trapped in life. If he feels free, then he'll feel strong. If he feels strong, then he'll be more attractive to his wife, and their marriage will flourish. In our society today, women are not taught how to be wives. And this puts a lot of strain on their husbands because they have to teach their wives how to respect them. It's not a husband's job to teach his wife about respect. It's the job of older women to do this. This is what Paul says in his letter to Titus. These older women must train younger women to love their husbands and their children, to live wisely and be pure, to work in their homes, to do good, and to be submissive to their husbands. Then they will not bring shame on the word of God. Since this doesn't happen in Western society, wives must work overtime to learn how to do it. If they don't, their husband will be forced to step in and teach them, and this will feel controlling for both parties. Since most Christian wives have a Bible, they have everything they need. They just need to start reading it and try to hone their personalities to match the godly women of old. The next thing they can do is to ask their husband to give them some guidelines to work toward, and then follow up with him periodically by asking, "How am I doing so far?" Simply by asking this, he will feel very respected. Personality is a good thing, but it must be refined. Both men and women need to work hard to refine their personalities. There's a time to speak and a time to remain quiet. Bubbly people often have a hard time staying quiet, while quiet people often have a hard time speaking. Since opposites attract, neither partner might see a need to work on their personality at all. But this can be problematic because they'll probably just get more and more entrenched in either speaking or silence, which will hurt their marriage in the long run. Both partners need to at least try to refine themselves in order to make life more comfortable for each other. Since a wife's job is to submit to her husband, she needs to train her brain to go into silent mode when he is speaking. Just like husbands need to submit to God and listen attentively to his voice, so too must wives listen attentively to their husbands and never interrupt him when he's speaking. This doesn't mean that women need to stop doing most of the talking in the relationship. In fact, the wife in the book of Song of Solomon speaks first, last, and the most. But she respected her husband and treated him like a king. He was free to do whatever he wanted, and she didn't question him about anything. In Ecclesiastes chapter 8, Solomon writes, "For the word of the king is powerful, and who can say to him, 'What are you doing?'" Ironically, wives today are notorious for asking this exact question. Men don't like being questioned, so wives need to train themselves to treat their husband like a king. And not only treat him like a king, but also view him like a king. Christian women often take issue with viewing their husband as a king because they think Jesus is the only king. If that were true, then how can Jesus be the King of Kings? If wives make their husbands kings, then Jesus can be the king over more kings. The same goes for Lord of Lords. Christian men are kings and lords, but just like Jesus removes the distance between himself and his bride, a husband too must step down off his throne and wash the feet of his wife. Wives, though, mustn't get comfortable with this nearness, but always seek to reinstate his power distance. That's how it works between Christ and his church. Jesus lifts us up, we humble ourselves before him. Wives often forget this part. They get used to the closeness and forget that there is in fact a hierarchy to God's creation. If she does not give him the distance he needs, he will end up taking it himself. But if she gives it to him freely, he will be able to remove it and draw her near. Wives need to remember that Adam was alone in the garden for a period of time without her, so he will be more comfortable with distance than she is. Yes, he needs to resist the urge to return to his pre-marriage freedom days, but a wife must understand that this might be hard for him, so she should give him ample space. When he is gone, she should ready herself for his summons or his return. Wives find it very easy to embrace their husbands, but very hard to embrace his lordship over them. But they must commit themselves to embracing his lordship, because that's what the Bible says. In Paul's first letter to the Corinthians, he says, "But I want you to realize that the head of every man is Christ, and the head of every woman is man, and the head of Christ is God." A wife's role is to reverse the curse of Eve by embracing her husband's authority and waiting for his instruction. She must also embrace him and be his helpmeet. If she does both of these well, he will love her and prize her above all others. In Song of Solomon, the wife says, "With great delight I sat in his shadow." How many wives today would say this? And the very next verse says, "His intention toward me was love." Husbands need to have an intention of love toward their wives, and the wives need to evoke this intention by sitting in his shadow. Is there any wife alive today who would delight in this? You be the judge. But wives need to recognize the tremendous power they possess to evoke intentions in their husband. How do men develop intentions in the first place? Do all men have the same intentions toward all women? Not at all. How then do intentions develop? They develop through attraction. A wife should try to be attractive to her husband because that was the source of his intentions toward her. Unfortunately, if the attraction was solely based on her physical appearance, it will fade over time along with her body. The good news, though, is that she can always be attractive if she hones her character to become a biblical woman. Song of Solomon wouldn't be a bad place to start her studies. One interesting thing about the woman's attitude in Song of Solomon is that she didn't concern herself with managing the risk of other women. She says, "Look, O daughters of Zion, at King Solomon, at the crown with which his mother crowned him on the day of his wedding, on the day of the gladness of his heart." She's pointing out her husband's greatness to other women without viewing them as a risk. Her husband was the king, so he could do whatever he wanted. His choices weren't in her domain. But she won his heart because she chased him and tried to be good to him. "I will seek him whom my soul loves. I held him and would not let him go until I brought him into my mother's house and into the chamber of her that conceived me." She made sure that he wouldn't leave her for other women by being the best woman she could possibly be for him. She gave him maximum freedom and maximum affection. We know from Solomon's life that he had other wives. Should he have? No, but that was between him and God. It wasn't in his wife's domain to manage that problem. Women today, though, live 24/7 in that domain. They think about it, they worry about it, they stress about it. They need to let it go. It's not their job to control their husband's relationship with God. God himself is strong enough to bring their husband down if he does something bad. The sooner the wife gets out of the way, the sooner God can deal with him. Wives must respond immediately to their husband's voice. This is the only mistake the wife makes in the whole book of Song of Solomon. In chapter 5, the husband is knocking at the door. "Open to me, my sister, my love, my dove, my perfect one." Have you ever heard a man call a woman 4 names in one breath? Probably not in our culture. But it should happen because relationships are multifaceted. Men need women who are many things to them: sisters, lovers, playmates, soulmates. Think about what each of those 4 names communicates. Sister equals trust and permanence. Love equals closeness and affection. Dove equals freedom and playfulness. Perfect one equals beauty and flawlessness. And each of these names are preceded by the word my, which shows possession. But notice what he says before he calls her any of these names. "Open to me." Are you open to your husband? Can he get anything he wants from you anytime he wants it? Or does he have to pry you open like a rusty hatch every time he wants something? How many times does your husband have to ask you for something? How many seconds does it take you to respond? Wives must be responsive to their husbands. If they aren't, The affectionate name-calling will stop. Why would a respectable man let his wife shut down his playfulness and then keep calling her his dove? Or why would he let her ignore him and then keep calling her his perfect one? If you want him to call you many good names, you have to be open to him and be many good things to him. But the wife in Song of Solomon made the same mistake that every woman makes at some point in their relationship. She was unresponsive. She did not open to him right away, but instead made a bunch of mental excuses, and then it was too late. I opened to my beloved, but my beloved had turned and was gone. My soul failed me when he spoke. I sought him, but I did not find him. I called him, but he gave no answer. Men today are experiencing a pandemic of unresponsiveness from their wives, which is one of the causes of their abusive behavior. Society tells them, you have to accept her unresponsiveness and you can't do anything about it. Reality responds, good luck. If a man is talking to his wife and she's not listening, he will start yelling at her. That's reality. Trying to change that reality is like trying to change gravity. Best case scenario, he leaves her without raising his voice or his fist, but more likely there will be some form of conflict. Men need responsiveness so badly, so wives should give it gladly. Later in the chapter, the woman does something right even though her husband took off because of her unresponsiveness. She speaks good of him behind his back and praises his good characteristics in great detail. My beloved is radiant and ruddy, distinguished among 10,000. His arms are rounded gold. His body is ivory work. His legs are alabaster columns. His appearance is like Lebanon, choice as the cedars. His speech is most sweet, and he is altogether desirable. Remember when the husband gave worth to his wife by constantly making her feel beautiful and pure? Well, now the wife is giving her husband worth by making him feel strong, free, handsome, and distinguished. She's giving him dominion-oriented names because a man's worth is derived from his dominion. Since Adam was given dominion over all of God's creation, a wife must make her husband feel like he has dominion. If she fails in this, he will feel worthless. Giving a man dominion doesn't mean shutting off and acting like a slave. Submissiveness is more like a proactive position rather than a reactive performance. The wife says, if I met you outside, I would kiss you, and no one would despise me. I would lead you and bring you into the house of my mother, and into the chamber of the one who bore me. Oh, that his left hand were under my head, and his right hand embraced me. Notice that she is leading him, but not from a higher position. She wants to be in his arms, supported and embraced. She didn't wait for him to make the first move. She needs his embrace and will lead him into that position. It's interesting that she wants to take him into her mother's house. Why? Maybe it's because she wants to take him back to the place where her life began so that her life can begin again in him, just like it was in Eden. That's why she wanted to be tucked into his chest, just like she was during her birth. Her life started when a bone was taken out of his body. Now she needs his bone again in her body to be reunited as one. It's no wonder that a man's erection is often called a boner. She needs his bone because that's how she gained life. A husband needs his wife to recognize her need for him. She needs to need his bone like she needs oxygen, and she should thank him for it every time he gifts her with life. The last point to be made from the book of Song of Solomon is that she should bring him peace. I was in his eyes as one who brings peace. Notice the phrase, in his eyes. If she is bringing him peace in her eyes, she's likely bringing him nothing but chaos. Wives must ensure that his life is full of peace according to him. Another great example that women can draw from is the story of Queen Esther. She was a perfect wife because she knew how to comfort the king and never angered him. She stood in stark contrast to Queen Vashti, who had made the king furious because of her unresponsive and disobedient behavior. The king was impulsive and quick to anger, yet he was never angry at Esther because she had refined her character to be soothing to him. How did she do this? First, she was simple. Notice her lack of attachment to material possessions. Before a young woman's turn came to go into King Xerxes, she had to complete 12 months of beauty treatments prescribed for the women, 6 months with oil of myrrh, and 6 with perfumes and cosmetics. And this is how she would go to the king. Anything she wanted was given her to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. In the evening, she would go there, and in the morning return to another part of the harem to the care of Shashgaz, the king's eunuch, who was in charge of the concubines. She would not return to the king unless he was pleased with her and summoned her by name. When the turn came for Esther, the young woman Mordecai had adopted, the daughter of his uncle Abihail, to go to the king, she asked for nothing other than what Haggai, the king's eunuch who was in charge of the harem, suggested. And Esther won the favor of everyone who saw her. She didn't think she knew better than Haggai. She trusted his expertise. She took the bare minimum with her to the king, and not surprisingly, we see the king's positive reaction. Now, the king was attracted to Esther more than to any of the other women, and she won his favor and approval more than any of the other virgins. So he set a royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. And the king gave a great banquet, Esther's banquet, for all his nobles and officials. He proclaimed a holiday throughout the provinces and distributed gifts with royal liberality. Nowadays, women think they need to adorn themselves with so many things in order to be attractive. They need to have the right clothing and shoes, they need to have an expensive handbag, they need to put on heaps of makeup. But men aren't attracted to those things. Men are much more attracted to simplicity. Paul tells us precisely how women should adorn themselves in his first letter to Timothy. I also want the women to dress modestly, with decency and propriety, adorning themselves not with elaborate hairstyles or gold or pearls or expensive clothes, but with good deeds appropriate for women who profess to worship God. A woman should learn in quietness and full submission. I do not permit a woman to teach or to assume authority over a man. She must be quiet. For Adam was formed first, then Eve. And Adam was not the one deceived, it was the woman who was deceived and became a sinner. But women will be saved through childbearing if they continue in faith, love, and holiness with propriety. Peter says exactly the same thing. Your beauty should not come from outward adornment such as elaborate hairstyles and the wearing of gold jewelry or fine clothes. Rather, it should be that of your inner self, the unfading beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is of great worth in God's sight. For this is the way the holy women of the past, who put their hope in God, used to adorn themselves. They submitted themselves to their own husbands, like Sarah, who obeyed Abraham and called him her Lord. You are her daughters if you do what is right and do not give way to fear. Here are Peter and Paul, pillars of the early church, telling women to be simple and focus on their character. Esther did a perfect job of this, and she used dominion-oriented names for the king. Pay careful attention to the words and posture she used when interacting with the king. If it pleases the king, replied Esther, let the king, together with Haman, come today to a banquet I have prepared for him. My petition and my request is this. If the king regards me with favor, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come tomorrow to the banquet I will prepare for them. Then I will answer the king's question. Esther again pleaded with the king, falling at his feet and weeping. She begged him to put an end to the evil plan of Haman the Agagite, which he had devised against the Jews. Then the king extended the gold scepter to Esther, and she arose and stood before him. If it pleases the king, she said, and if he regards me with favor and thinks it is the right thing to do, and if he is pleased with me, let an order be written overruling the dispatches that Haman son of Hammedatha the Agagite devised and wrote to destroy the Jews in all the king's provinces. For how can I bear to see destruction fall on my people? How can I bear to see the destruction of my family? Would Esther's language and behavior be considered acceptable in society today? Not at all. She would be deemed a feeble-minded girl at best and a misogynistic traitor at worst. But society can say whatever it wants. The fact is, she saved a nation and her husband loved her. How many women today would like to leave a legacy like this? Would they rather follow Queen Esther or cling to their stupid pride? Esther never fought with her husband even once. How many wives can say this today? The secret to Queen Esther's success was that she knew what was in her domain and what wasn't. She didn't concern herself with things outside her domain. For example, when the king gave her Haman's estate, she passed it straight on to Mordecai. Why would she concern herself with managing an estate? That would just be a distraction in fulfilling her primary role as a wife. That same day, King Xerxes gave Queen Esther the estate of Haman, the enemy of the Jews. And Mordecai came into the presence of the king, for Esther had told how he was related to her. The king took off his signet ring, which he had reclaimed from Haman, and presented it to Mordecai. And Esther appointed him over Haman's estate. Esther wasn't proud, she wasn't greedy, she wasn't gaudy, she was simple and smart. She feared God and the king, she understood her role, she left a legacy of salvation. Notice that God doesn't comment on whether Esther was a good woman or not. That's up to us to decide. She lived in a harem and had sex with a pagan man. Would any pastors approve of that today? Should she have tried to escape and live a life of chastity in the hills? Many Christians think of God as a sort of bookkeeper in the sky, keeping track of our moral failures and successes. But in the Bible, God isn't like this. He's more interested in what we accomplish on a macro level. He's interested in the full story of our lives, not a single snapshot. He's interested in the disposition of our heart, not the drubbing of doctrine. When we read stories like Esther's, we need to decide which character we want to be and what kind of legacy we want to leave. Our modern society is going to hell anyway, so why not take a risk like Esther did and save the nation by being a person society will despise? After all, that's exactly what Jesus did. Esther was committed to being the best wife possible. Have you ever met a woman whose highest priority was to be a good wife? Most women's highest priority is motherhood, not wifehood. They think if they're a good mother, their husband owes them love and respect. They say, "Give me children," thinking it will somehow benefit their husband's life. It won't. It will only benefit his life if you give him children. What good are children to him if they're not under his dominion? What good are children if they take away your attention from him? Why would he want to start talking and then have you suddenly interrupt him to care for the baby? Men don't need to be in second place their entire lives. If you look at wives interacting with both their husband and their children, the children take first place every time. This doesn't help the husband at all, and it drives him away from the family. Here's a question for wives. How many times per week would you like your husband to make you feel beautiful and loved? Write down your answer on a piece of paper, and then give him fear and dominion that same number of times. Don't give him love. Men don't need love. Men need your fear, which will result in your loyalty, and they need your submission, which will grant him dominion. The norm in society today is for young men to try to sleep with as many girls as they can. Some men have a black book with the list of all the girls they slept with. Do you think this book is about love? Did they keep track of all the names of the girls just to remember how much love they received in life? No. It's about dominion. It's about conquering. When you compare what women want to what they're offering today, it's not a good deal for men. Men in Western society get a worse deal than any other men around the world and throughout history. Sadly, most Christian women are no different than secular women today. They're nothing like the biblical women of old. But a time will come when women need men again. At that point, they will be willing to offer men a good deal. Isaiah chapter 4 says, "In that day 7 women will take hold of one man and say, 'We will eat our own food and provide our own clothes. Only let us be called by your name. Take away our disgrace.'" A husband must be deeply respected, or feared as the Bible would put it. Wives must find a way to give him this fear. Otherwise, they'll find themselves facing his wrath. It's the same with God. If we don't give him our fear, we'll find ourselves facing his wrath. Wrath equals fear due minus fear given. I'll say that again. Wrath equals fear due minus fear given. God is worthy of our fear because he is our Savior. He is good to us. Psalm 90 says, "If only we knew the power of your anger, your wrath is as great as the fear that is your due." Just because someone is strong doesn't mean they are worthy of fear. Bullies are often physically strong, but they're not worthy of fear. God, though, is good, so we should freely give him our fear. He died a torturous death to save us from our sins. We need to fear that. If we don't give him our fear now, we'll sure as hell fear him at the judgment. The same goes for wives and their husbands. A woman should choose a good man and freely give him her fear. If she doesn't fear him for his goodness, she'll surely fear him when his wrath is kindled. To sum up this chapter, the basic role of a wife is this: to embrace her husband as a helpmeet and embrace his authority over her. Since dominion is his calling, she should gift him with it freely and never challenge it. She should help him grow in his authority by lifting him up and making him feel strong by giving herself completely to him. This is how she can help him fill the world with love.